Okay, awesome. If you want to go ahead and do that, that'd be great.
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, we are thankful for this day. We thank Thee for this opportunity that we have to meet as a group and discuss the case study that we went over this week. I ask You to please bless us that we will be able to learn from one another and that we may have an effective discussion. And we thank Thee for the gospel and for all the blessings we have, and we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to start off with a quick synopsis of the case. Basically, I mean, we all read it. Columbia crew passed away only 38 miles into the atmosphere. And 7 months after this accident, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board presented the report on the causes of the accident. They pinpointed the technical cause of the accident, and they also identified organizational issues with NASA dating back decades. This organization also reported how managers might have behaved differently during the mission and stressed the organizational shortcomings of NASA that contributed to the catastrophe. So that's kind of that summary. From what I understand, it's like a lot of foam, like it was a big piece of foam that came off and damaged the left toe wing. Is that a okay synopsis for you guys?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
All right, so what were some of the main issues in this case?
So I can go, I guess. I think, okay, so I kind of did three kind of issues that I found. Was first of all the foam and kind of the cause of it. It seemed like they had no clue what was happening with it, and they just kind of threw it to the side, prove me wrong type attitude. It's an accepted risk. And then also kind of the imagery and the cameras on the shuttle itself. It seemed like, that was part of the reason they had like these old cameras that weren't giving them good stuff. And so they couldn't really know what was going on because of that, maybe. I'm not sure exactly, but. And then just the culture, is very bureaucratic, and it was hard to get anything done, especially if you're a little lower on the ladder. Those kind of the main things.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any other issues that they saw?
I noticed that there had been throughout the history of the space shuttle program this just a history of kind of ignoring problems. Like if problems didn't become severe enough, they kind of started to. It said they started to accept and ignore them, and so I think that was a huge part of the eventual disaster with Columbia, was because they ignored those foaming problems, and I think that was just one of the problems that they were ignoring, and so the fact that they didn't really address the issues, even if they seemed small at the time, eventually became much more severe when they weren't expecting it to, I guess.
Yeah, I also was a little taken back by their willingness to think that things were already safe enough and that it didn't matter what happened, whether foam hit the side of the shuttle on its initial takeoff. They said that once they're up in space, if it's really damaged it too much, there's nothing we can do, and that kind of defeatist attitude. I mean, these are lives you're talking about. We're not just sending some supplies that are unmanned and whatever. These are astronauts that I know the risk, and there is that assumed risk there. But that's pretty callous behavior when your response is, well, if it's damaged that bad, well, there's nothing we can do. And I, would want, the person that said that, wouldn't they hope that if they were one of the astronauts up there, that someone down at NASA would be trying to work the problem to get them home to their families?
Exactly. I felt like they kept on justifying the problem just as like a no safety of flight issue, and yeah, they said there's nothing we can do about it, and so we're not going to worry about it, you know.
Mhm.
That's what I thought was interesting is I thought, shouldn't they figure out everything that could go wrong and then try to figure it out instead of like, I don't know, sending everybody into space and then figuring out afterwards all the stuff that could be going wrong. But
There was also that problem where they were just they didn't do any like test flights. They just did testing on the ground, and so there just wasn't any uh, information that they could get back or kind of work through by doing some test flights. I mean, I know that that came at a cost, but again, when you're talking about, I mean, you're talking about the most important thing, right? You're talking about human life, and there's just no price on that. Maybe you do a few fewer launches in order to make sure that your astronauts are safe. But that whole testing of just ground testing and not doing any in-flight testing was also a problem, I thought.
for sure. One other big problem I saw was that they either didn't have procedures or they had procedures that they just ignored. So like they're supposed to meet daily and they only met like 5 times. They didn't know who they were supposed to report to half the time. It's really unorganized.
Yeah. One other problem that I noticed was it's mentioned several times how they had this like flight schedule and they wanted to stick to it and they wanted to run so many missions per year, and then later on it talked about that lady, her last name was Ham or something, and it said something about they needed to keep the schedule to be able to send the node to something about the International Space Station, and so it's just it just seems like this mentality of um, kind of like the higher ups at NASA just wanted to basically look good and wanted and so they disregarded a lot of the issues that were coming up is my opinion.
I totally agree. Do we see any other ones, or do you want me to move? Oh, Michaela, do you have something?
I think that they probably, with all these issues happening, I think they just take like a break, because it seemed like they just kept rushing it, thinking that they knew like how to solve the problem, but in reality they really didn't. And I think that it would have been better if they like took a break and really took the time and effort into figuring out like how they could solve these problems, to help them financially and, prevent taking more lives and stuff.
Exactly. I think they were under such pressure to pay off the expense of this program by having, a certain amount of trips in a year for the shuttle. I think they should have taken a break. They're just too stuck on the schedule. Okay, so the next part that we're going to talk about is the recovery window, and this is the time period between a threat and the accident or the prevented accident. So it's talking about like the time period between when they recognize a problem and when the crash happened. So what was the recovery time window in this case?
The recovery time window, like the amount of days.
I think it was about wasn't it close to 2 weeks from when they noticed the problem to when the shuttle exploded. I think it was almost 2 weeks, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, on this it says the time between when the problem of the phone strike was discovered and after the day of the launch and the day that the Columbia exploded.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is human cognitive biases and how does it apply to this case? So we're talking about biases that maybe made NASA kind of view the situation differently and how they reacted.
I think it has a lot to do with what we kind of talked about a little bit, just the whole what Bryce was saying, just NASA wanted to look good. They had this schedule on how many missions they were going to do per year, and so they were rushed, and that really affected it, and it clogged everything up, and everything was ineffective because of that cultural issue there.
I don't know if this completely fits, but I was kind of astounded about the different hoops or the specific. There was like one specific way that communication traveled through all the departments, and if it didn't exactly go from this person to this person to this person, then it never got around to everybody. If you went out of that loop, then I mean, there was the request for the photos, right? That a military satellite take a picture so we could have a definitive answer. And like the head woman at Mission Control or whatever, she says because she didn't know who it came from, she just canceled that request. And that was a huge problem for me. And so I just didn't understand why it had to be so complex, and there were all these, protocols that maybe worked at one time, but maybe, 20, 30 years into the program needed to have some updates. Technology had certainly advanced. There are a lot of things that could have helped that process.
Definitely. Another one, so they mentioned a couple like different biases. So one of them is confirmation bias, which is the tendency to look for information that confirms your existing views. So, I mean, you can kind of see that in NASA. And then another one is sunk cost bias, and that's when they had spent so many resources and money and time into this project, and so they, that's definitely a bias. They want to continue it. So.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. All right, when did the problems with Columbia begin?
Ooh.
I would say before launch. I mean, right off the bat, there was this talk about the temperature being too cold, right? That there was worries that the O-rings were going to potentially fail.
That was with the Challenger.
Oh, that's true. That was with Challenger.
But I mean, that shows a history of them ignoring stuff. Sorry.
No, hey, Cassie.
What?
What'd you say?
I was just that shows a history of management of NASA ignoring engineers and experts. So that was a good addition. Sorry,
Yeah.
Go on, Bryce.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was going to talk about. Was I think the problem with with Columbia. I mean, really, it all started back when, I mean, really, probably at the beginning of the space shuttle program, with all of the ignoring problems and just the chaos, all of the chaotic management that we've been talking about, the way of communication within NASA and how many people it has to go through, and also a former astronaut had mentioned the culture about NASA, how if you're an engineer, your voice doesn't really get heard. It's like it seems like they're kind of intimidated by the higher ups at NASA, and he talked about having to in order to kind of prove to prove something, you have to have such a ridiculous amount of evidence, and I mean, so it's just kind of chaotic to me, and it's extremely bureaucratic, and I think that just that culture itself is at the root of the problem.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, where it started. Definitely. Okay, let's see. Why did the debris strikes become an acceptable risk?
Well, because many of the shuttles returned home safely, and they just repaired what dents and scratches and of the tiles that they needed to do. The thing that's still interesting about those foam hits is that you could almost exclusively talk about the most damage coming from the left side, wasn't it? And so it's like, why was that? I mean, if you could detail it down to that, at least half of the shuttle, then why weren't you trying to figure out what that cause was? I mean, ultimately, I think they just had this false sense of security because so many of these missions came back safely that ultimately you didn't have to care about how much damage happened on the initial takeoff. So that's kind of where my mind went there.
It's almost like they use that as like a security blanket, saying that with them being able to come home, they almost like didn't bother because they were successful with some of them. So they kind of just pushed it off, and you're like, well, there's that chance that they'll make it. I think they just didn't focus on it as much.
Yeah, just adding to that, the fact that they made this like DAT, debris assessment team, instead of like the Tiger team that they had for like the Apollo 13 that saved the Apollo 13. They went through, I don't know if it was similar issues or not, but they went through some issues and they formed this cool team. I don't know why they call it a Tiger team, but anyways, it just shows that the Tiger team had the authority to, hey, this is our opinion, and everyone took them seriously. But the DAT, this team that was put together just kind of nonchalant, it looked like, for this little issue, like we've been talking about, no one took them seriously. They couldn't communicate with the higher guys. And if they did, they were like, well, they're too low. I don't know. It was just, they weren't taken seriously. This whole issue just wasn't taken seriously.
Yeah, I think that's kind of hitting it on the head. I think as time went on, people were like, oh, I haven't heard about it, or they haven't been given authority, so it must not be that big of a problem, it really stinks that there was a couple guys who knew ahead of time how serious it was and they couldn't persuade, I think that has to do with the whole culture, and they talked about the mantra of NASA kind of being prove me something's wrong instead of prove me that it's right, which was a big issue. Which kind of goes on to our next thing. How would you characterize the culture at NASA? What are some of the strengths and weaknesses? I think some of the strengths are they've got really, good people, really smart people.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, strong people, they work hard, they have the intelligence, they have the background, they have a lot of experience in a lot of different areas. One of the weaknesses of the culture, I think, is I think whenever a company, well, this could so easily get into a government discussion and could really get off the rails there, but they contract out to a lot of private companies, and people like Boeing and people like Lockheed Martin, they themselves have their own company culture, and if that conflicts or doesn't quite gel with NASA, then there are going to be some issues there, I think. You can't always insulate yourself to where you don't have any, your business doesn't have any type of relationship with other businesses, but I think that NASA at times did not, as we've discussed, did not heed the experts that were in the specific fields of these contractors, and because of that, they paid a pretty big price.
I think that just the whole kind of bureaucratic feeling of it, it seemed like there was a chain of command they had to go through to get anything done, but nobody knew who they were supposed to report to or who they're supposed to talk to get anything done. And then, just seemed like there were only a few guys who could make key decisions and didn't really listen to anybody else. So.
Yeah, I think just tying it into the book we've been reading, The Speed of Trust, the author, Stephen, is just talking about how, like, one sign that there's not a lot of trust is, like, heavy levels of management all over the place. And it seems like NASA had that going all the time, like we've been talking about the bureaucratic culture there, and that's a sign of distrust, according to that book. And I believe that. I think that maybe one of the key issues is that, they didn't trust the lower guys or whatever, so maybe they all just need to read The Speed of Trust and get things going.
Okay. So the next question is, tell me about people in the case that were important contributors to this mission's failure. Right off the bat, I can think of Linda Ham. She seemed to kind of almost mock the people who, kind of doubted the safety and security of the orbiter. Can you guys think of anybody else?
There was that one guy, I can't remember his name right now. He was one of the, basically he said, well, even if he was denying that there was a serious problem, like with the wing, when the foam hit the wing, and they were like analyzing the pictures. But he said even if there is a problem, there's nothing we can do about it. And that guy just seemed to have a kind of a, I don't know. He just, to me, he's probably one of the guys that just wanted NASA to get all these missions through and didn't really care about. And he just wanted to keep his job at NASA and look good, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't remember his name though, but
it might be
Yeah.
Calvin.
Yeah, I'm looking for it, but yeah.
Yeah.
I think too. They talked about that Boeing analyst who was so inexperienced, and was given a huge job, but they couldn't even. The thing that baffled me is I'm like, they gave it to a guy who didn't have the experience and the expertise necessary, and then they wouldn't believe him because he didn't have that expertise. So yeah. I just don't know why they didn't pick someone more qualified in the first place.
So true.
Okay, go on. All right, so what do you guys think, what are some solutions to some of these issues?
I think that there should be some sort of entity that outside of NASA that has zero interest in NASA that can keep them accountable, an entity that can come in and inspect like safety stuff with the space shuttles or something, and it's like someone that has no bias or anything, like a non-government agency or I don't know what, some form of entity that comes in and kind of checks and balances the internal people at NASA, because I think it's obvious with this case that the internal people at NASA, they have an agenda, and so they, a lot of the problems continued because of that agenda and not addressing those problems. So I just feel like some sort of outside people coming in and keeping them accountable would basically force NASA to comply with the rules and regulations that they are supposed to be complying with.
Mm. I guess I would, one of the things I would recommend just for the camera issue, to have better readings on the spacecraft itself. I know there's a cut budget, so that's really tough, but if they do have these other, private companies they're working with, they can tell them the situation, explain to them, hey, we have a lack of understanding in some areas, we need better equipment, the government has cut our funding, so we kind of need you guys, I don't know, do some sort of fundraiser type thing to get better cameras and just whatever equipment they need to be able to really know what's going on with the spacecraft.
Yeah, Jared, I think you're onto something there. I mean, look, isn't a cost savings to just reduce the number of missions you do in a year, and then you could move those funds into things that help keep your astronauts safe? I mean, I think it's kind of ridiculous that they have 5 cameras, and those 5 cameras, some of them don't even work, and those that work, there is some distorted shot. It just isn't up to date on the technology front. And I mean, I can't imagine those cameras being cheap, but I'm sure scrapping just one mission in a year would more than cover the cost of getting those replaced and getting up to date technology there. I also am thinking about still this aggressive, clearly aggressive behavior, but also some passive aggressive behavior, and how that really can damage the culture of the place you work, whether it's a federal government-run business or in a private business. And so that was one of the things I kind of hit on in the case study is that aggressive behavior and passive aggressive behavior is something that just has to be completely dealt with immediately, and I think that's something that wasn't dealt with very well. I know I'm reading into maybe some of the inner workings of it a little bit more, but ultimately I'm not surprised that NASA just got defunded completely, and there's just no space program really anymore to speak of, other than sending satellites out to some forsaken place. So anyway, but I just think that people in this time period and obviously a little bit before really led ultimately to the demise of NASA.
Good point.
One thing that I thought about, which was kind of similar to what Jared was saying earlier, is I think they should have had, the team should have been taken more seriously, and they should have been granted more authority. So I think they should have had, the leader of it should have been someone who is top management at NASA. And then I think that they should have had access to the tools and programs they needed. So I think they should have had probably more access from the DoD and just other satellite imagery. I think they should have been granted, everything that they needed in order to be able to work better. And then I think just better crisis policies should have been instituted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what is the concept of psychological safety?
Psychological safety?
Uh-huh. So, as a hint, it says team climate and design that affects team behavior and performance, concept of risk-taking, and culture and team unity. So something that I can think of off the bat, just this psychological safety, is I think a lot of people are like, well, we're all really smart, and if nobody thinks that there's a problem, then there's not a problem.
Right. Good point.
These were really hard discussion questions.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting thing, because it's like the main people at the main office, either in Florida or in DC for NASA, I think that really was the thinking. Until you can prove to me without a shadow of a doubt that X that 1 + 1 = 2, then I'm not going to believe you. And that was a problem, because I think that there were a number of people that brought concerns from previous shuttle programs and to this shuttle flight, and for whatever reason, since it didn't get to these major players, not only, I mean, do you hear of any of them getting charged with anything, any type of mismanagement, or they are a government agency. There should have been some investigation into some of these actions, and I don't remember hearing any of them getting punished or fired or worse. And that to me just shows, my wife works for the federal government right now, Department of Interior, so nothing that comes after you. But she, it runs through almost the entire federal government that there is just this feeling that once you're in this position, there's really nothing that you can do that would cause you to lose your job. You'll just get shoved over into another office, and the problem still exists. And so that's kind of how I felt about this NASA case study. Is there were just a very few people that could ultimately do anything and had the power to do things, and for whatever reason, information didn't get to them that proved enough to make any changes.
Wow. That's scary.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Wow.
I guess one other thing what?
I just asked what happened. Someone told a joke.
Oh. So I think another thing that I can think of that I actually mentioned in my solutions is there's this concept, I read online, there's like this 6 deadly sins of running a business. And one of them is the deadly sin of Naviet or something. It's the concept of it can't happen here. Like, it just won't happen. It's not possible. And so I think maybe that's what they were thinking is, oh, it won't, it could, but it won't, like, it can't happen. So there's that too. So do you guys have any personal experiences? I know Ben just shared one about his wife, and kind of the culture in the interior.
Psychological safety.
These are really weird questions.
Trying to think.
Any personal experiences that kind of relate to the case too?
Just a new big word for me, so I'm trying to soak it all in.
I think I kind of have one. It's like when I was in high school and you were like on a sports team, you had like your rules and stuff. If this is way off, I don't understand. But you had like rules that like set things you couldn't do if you were an athlete, or else you would lose your privileges. And so, like, we had, the all-stars that had the last name, and they were big, and the best of the best on the team and stuff, and they got, they broke those, rules and stuff. But did they get kicked off the team? No. Did they lose their if they were captains, they got demoted down, lost their privilege and stuff. But if you weren't one of those that had the name, you got in trouble. So I think it's just kind of like, it all kind of goes, like, with now, like, kind of relating this to the case study, if you, like, didn't have that name, then you weren't gonna, like, it wasn't, like, with the problem, if it wasn't going to be, like, reasonable or something, then it wasn't gonna happen, or something like that.
Sounds like they just had too much power because they had a good safety net.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. What principles, if any, from this lesson's reading apply to this case? You talked a little bit about speed of trust.
What principles from what?
From this week's.
What principles, if any, from this week's reading apply to this case?
I actually haven't read this week's reading yet, so I don't know.
I think it just teaches us. It's just an example that. Sorry, it's just an example of low trust. We can just see that Stephen was right on talking about how if there's low trust, there's a lot of management, and it's slow. So speed is low, and the cost is obviously extremely high. Like Ben was saying, there's no price on human life. So right there, since trust was low, speed was extremely slow, and costs were really high.
This isn't from this week's reading, but I really go back to the behaviors that were in our reading. And some of, I think it was just last week's reading, behavior number 11 about listening first, I think would have gone a long way in helping NASA take care of some of these problems. So often, people just weren't listening. They were not just hearing what the concerns were. They didn't care what people were saying unless there was a definitive 100% certainty to what they were saying. And that's nearly impossible, I think, in this environment. And then number 13 is extend trust. And there's a quote that was in there by Warren Bennis, who was the author of On Becoming a Leader, and he just simply says, leadership without mutual trust is a contradiction in terms. And I think that says a lot and speaks a lot to the head of NASA, these main folks that we've been talking about. I think ultimately they didn't trust that these engineers and these other folks in other areas they didn't trust them. They just didn't have that trust first philosophy.
Awesome.
Yeah. A big theme in that book is organizational trust, and they talk a lot about how you can kind of tell how business is being run, how if the lower employees, don't really trust the management, maybe things are being mismanaged, and I feel like I wouldn't really trust, management who wouldn't, examine obvious issues or, problems that came up.
For sure.
I think kind of on a positive note for NASA, thinking back on the reading, the societal trust, we, at least me before this reading, I just trusted them. It's because they show results, they got a man to the moon. So I was on their side from the beginning, but now I'm starting to doubt them.
That's psychological safety.
Exactly. Good.
We knew you'd get there, Jared. We knew it.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think we hit on most of the discussion questions. Does anybody else have any other thoughts?
Of course I do. I mean, Jared, I did find Tiger Team for you. Are you ready for this? There was a 1964 paper, it doesn't tell me where that paper was from, that defined the term as a team of undomesticated and uninhibited technical specialists selected for their experience, energy, and imagination and assigned to track down relentlessly every possible source of failure in a spacecraft subsystem.
Wow.
There
That's
you
what they.
Are you on the Tiger
Sounds like
team? Okay, I really killed us, so that's good.
That was amazing.
I think that was really good.
We're a Tiger
It's
team.
interesting.
We are a Tiger
They
team.
should have had that for the Columbia. They should have had a Tiger team instead of a team of engineers who weren't taken seriously.
You don't even need alcohol to become uninhibited.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna send you guys a link to this video that he gave to us. It just shows kind of the real-time reactions of the people at Houston.
Hey,
Cool.
Yeah, so you can kind of see the moment that they realized that they had lost contact and what had happened. So it's kind of sad. So I'll be sending that to you guys and this link. Okay, awesome. Do we know who is the leader for next week?
I believe it's Bryce.
Where's the sheet that has all the leaders?
I sent an email. Remember when that
Yeah, I was looking for it. I just couldn't find it.
there was that one student that was coming. So back on like the 16th of May, I forwarded it to everybody in the group, I believe.
Okay. Oh, 16.
Yeah. But I can just read it real quick. So Casey was this week, Bryce is next week, and I'm 2 weeks, and then Michaela, and then Jared, and that's it.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
All right. Well, I will see you guys next week, and I'll send you those links.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.